I was only 9 years old when my parents first left me alone in the car for hours. At first, I told myself they'd be right back. But the minutes stretched into hours, the air grew hotter, and every sound outside made me flinch. They said it was fine, that kids these days are too soft, and that I was learning independence. But when the police found me, pale and dizzy, the report used a word I'd never heard before, one that would change the way I saw my parents forever. What followed was a storm of family secrets, legal battles, and the slow unraveling of everything I thought was normal. When the door clicked shut and their footsteps faded, the car swallowed me whole. I watched the storefront clock through a streak of dust on the windshield. 10 minutes. 20. The sun climbed like a slow-breathing animal, pressing its weight on the hood until the air inside turned sticky and heavy. I cracked the window the way Dad had taught me, just 2 fingers, so no one can reach in, and listen to the mall's hum. A cart rattled. Someone laughed. Somewhere far away, a baby cried, and my chest answered with a hitch I tried to smother. I was 9. I was independent. Mom's word, said with a bright smile and a tense jaw, I sucked on the last cube of melting ice from my paper cup and held it against my wrist the way I'd learned from the week before, the way you learn anything you're not supposed to need. My t-shirt clung to my back. My legs itched against the seatbelt. The radio showed a blinking 12 o'clock. Dad hadn't fixed the clock since daylight savings, and I pretended 12 o'clock meant now, which meant they could be back any second. When the banging started on the glass, it sounded like thunder trapped in a jar. A woman with a sunburn and a big straw bag peered in at me, her face flattening with worry. Her lips moved fast. I shook my head. No. Yes, but I don't think she saw. She shouted to someone I couldn't see. The next knock inched open the window and brought in a blade of cool air. I drank it. Sirens arrived like a promise I didn't remember ordering. A uniformed man appeared, then too, and my door was open, and a bright square of midday swallowed half the heat at once. The hand that gentled me out was warm and steady. I told them it was fine. I told them my parents would be right back, that this happened sometimes, that I was learning independence, that I was not a baby. I repeated it like scripture. The taller officer's mouth softened in a way that made my stomach knot. He asked how long I'd been there. I glanced at the blinking 12 o'clock and said, I don't know. He draped a thin silver blanket over my shoulders and walked me toward the shade. The woman with the straw bag hovered, wringing her hands like they were wet laundry. A paramedic pressed a cold bottle to my palm and clipped a plastic thing to my finger. He asked questions. I answered them politely, like Dad liked me to. Through the glass doors of the mall, I saw, at last, my mother jogging toward us with a paper shopping bag, her ponytail swishing a rhythm I knew by heart. Dad was behind her, slower, thumbs already flying on his phone. Mom's smile arrived. First, huge and bright and for the crowd, then slipped when she clocked the blanket. The officers, me, small and waiting. It's fine, she said, breathless, to the officers. We were right inside. We were 2 minutes. She had a receipt in her hand like proof. Dad added, he's dramatic, like I wasn't there. The tall officer's clipboard flashed. He checked boxes, writing carefully. He asked for IDs. He asked for addresses. He asked, very softly, if anyone had ever left me before. I looked at Mom, whose chin had found that stubborn angle, and at Dad, whose mouth had become a thin, hard line, and I said, no. Later, at the station's cool desk, I saw the words, the ones the paramedic had said under his breath, the ones the tall officer wrote in the neatest print I'd ever seen, suspected child endangerment. I sounded it out silently, like a puzzle with a prize inside. Endangerment. It tasted like a grown-up word that could crack a family in half if you said it too loud. I didn't say it. I watched Mom's shoulders rise and fall and heard Dad arguing. In a room down the hall. The officer slid me a peppermint and asked if I wanted to sit closer to the fan. I nodded. Because I was independent enough to be grateful. When they finally brought my parents back to me, their faces were polite for the building and furious for me. We walked to the parking lot without touching. The sun had shifted. The car had cooled. The word followed me anyway, like a sticker I hadn't realized was on my shirt. At the curb, Mom bent low and whispered, "We're handling this at home." Dad opened the back door and said, too casually, "Hop in." I did, and as the door closed, I caught a reflection in the glass, me, small and shiny-eyed, and the tall officer, standing under the awning, writing one more line on his clipboard. He looked up, met my gaze across the distance, and gave a slow, serious nod I didn't understand. I only understood the engine starting, the locks engaging, and Dad saying, like nothing had happened, "Next time, keep the window closed." Next time. The word lodged in my throat. Because that night, after the dishes, Mom slipped a paper from her purse and tucked it into the drawer with the takeout menus. I pulled it out later, when the house was dark, and read the header, "Incident Report." My name. The time. The temperature. And then, near the bottom, a sentence that ended the night for me, referred to Child Protective Services. I stared at it so long the letters swam. In the quiet, a floorboard creaked. Someone else was awake. And from the hallway, I heard the unmistakable whisper of my mother on the phone, "If they come tomorrow, we don't answer the door." They came on a Thursday, when the smell of bleach still clung to our kitchen and every pillow on the couch had been karate chopped into perfect triangles. Mom wore a sweater even though it was warm and called the woman at the door ma'am, in a way that made the word feel like a costume. Dad stood at the counter like a bouncer at a club, arms crossed, knuckles pale. The woman introduced herself as a caseworker and asked if she could sit. Mom said of course, would she like iced tea? Do they always send someone this quickly? What a misunderstanding. We're very involved parents. I'd been told to keep my answers short, my voice steady, and my eyes on the caseworker. Not my parents. It felt like rehearsing lines for a play I did not audition for. The caseworker asked about the car, about time, about heat, about whether I felt scared. I said I was fine. She asked if I'd been left alone before. I inhaled, looked at the sweater sleeve that hid Mom's white-knuckled grip on her glass, and said, "I don't remember." The caseworker's gaze softened in a way that remembered things for me. She asked where I slept, what I liked to eat, if I had my own toothbrush. She asked to see the bathroom. Mom's laugh had a pitch-eyed, never heard, a silver tinkle that reminded me of ice in a glass I was not allowed to touch. "Of course," she said, and led the way like a tour guide who needed a good tip. In the hallway, the caseworker lingered on the family photos, weddings with stiff smiles, birthdays with candles, a kindergarten portrait of me where my collar was crooked and Mom's thumbnail had trimmed my hair the night before. There were no pictures of cars or heat or the silence between my parents when doors closed. The caseworker tapped a frame lightly, as if testing for a hollow spot. "Beautiful family," she said, and wrote something down. After she left, Dad exploded without raising his voice, a talent he wore like a prize. "This," he said, "is why we can't have slip-ups." Mom rubbed her temples and said, "It was fine until that woman with the straw bag stuck her nose in." I hovered near the sink, carefully rinsing a single glass, as if cleanliness could be protection. That night, as if trying to tuck me into normal, Mom told me about her childhood, about summers in a trailer where the AC rattled but didn't cool, about waiting in hot cars while her mother cashed checks or chased tips at the diner. "We turned out fine," she said, her voice light but her eyes stubborn. "It builds grit." I nodded like I knew what grit was at 9 years old and like I wanted any part of it. The following week, a man arrived, guardian ad litem, he said, a phrase that sounded like a spell. He was there for my best interests and to hear my voice. No one in our house ever asked to hear my voice except to check how it sounded. He spoke to me in the backyard, where the air smelled like cut grass and the neighbor's grill. He didn't write while I talked. He didn't interrupt. He asked what scared me, and I said bees. He smiled and said, "What else?" So I told him about time, how it stretched like gum between my fingers when I sat in the car alone, how it stuck, thin and see-through, between me and the people I loved, asked if I ever got in trouble for being scared. I said yes without meaning to. He asked if anyone told me I was dramatic. I laughed because that word had never felt like an insult until he said it next to my name. He asked if I trusted my parents. I opened my mouth and found nothing ready. I love them, I said, and his eyes were gentle when he answered, "Those are different questions." Before he left, he crouched so we were eye level. "If someone asks you again how long you were in the car," he said, "and you don't remember the minutes, what do you remember?" I swallowed. The smell of vinyl. The way the sun hit the dashboard. The feeling when the air goes still, like a held breath. I said, "I remember the heat." He nodded. Sometimes that's enough. A court date appeared on the fridge like a picture from school, bold letters, my name in the caption. Dad read it and sighed like the house had failed an exam. Mom started baking muffins the way she did when she needed something to rise. I listened to their whispered strategy, emphasize church, emphasize work, emphasize the neighborhood watch Dad had joined and mostly ignored. "We're not monsters," Mom said, and I believed her with my whole body, and still, like a splinter, the word endangerment caught on everything. Days before court, a new detail cracked open. I found a second incident report in the glove compartment, crumpled with fast food napkins. The date was 3 months earlier. The officer's note was blunt: child observed alone in vehicle, approximately 45 minutes. No paramedics that time, no caseworker, just a warning. A warning they hadn't mentioned. My hands shook as I refolded the paper. In the window, my reflection looked older, like secrets had added years to my cheeks. That night I set the report on the kitchen table like a bomb and waited for it to go off. Mom saw it first. She went gray. Dad's face hardened into granite. "That was nothing," he said. We were in line. We could see the car the whole time. Mom reached for the paper, but I covered it with my palm. I said, "If they ask me in court, do I lie?" The room held its breath. Dad said, "Finally, you tell them we are good parents." Mom stared at the muffins rising behind glass. The oven ticked. Outside, a siren passed. And in the silence after, Mom's voice, small and far away, said something that made the ground tilt under me. What if he tells them the truth? The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. Every bench creaked as if it had its own opinion. I wore the shirt Mom ironed until the buttons shone. Dad's tie cut a black line down his chest. The guardian ad litem met us at the door and gave me a nod that steadied my knees. In the courtroom, the judge had kind eyes and a jaw that meant business. She asked everyone to state their names. Hearing mine echo off would made me feel like I'd just done something wrong. The caseworker spoke first, measured and calm. She said the word endangerment the way you say Tuesday. She talked about temperatures and guidelines, about how quickly a parked car becomes an oven, about how a child's body doesn't regulate heat like an adult's. Mom's hand found my knee under the table and squeezed like she wanted to anchor me to the version of us where we were fine. Our lawyer, a man with a cologne that arrived before he did, painted us as a busy, loving family. He called Dad hardworking and Mom attentive and said I was resilient, which landed on my shoulders with a weight I didn't remember asking to carry. He called me independent and I flinched. The judge noticed, when it was my turn, my feet didn't touch the floor. The guardian ad litem asked simple questions. I answered them with the care of someone trying to carry water in a paper cup. "How long were you in the car?" he asked. "I don't know minutes," I said, "but I remember the heat." The courtroom shifted, a small ripple, like everyone had moved an inch closer. "Were you scared?" "I was careful," I said, because scared still felt like betrayal. "Careful how?" I counted breaths. I saved the last ice. I kept the window open a little, even though I wasn't supposed to. He asked if this had happened before. The truth knelt beside me and waited to be chosen. I swallowed. Yes, I said, and my voice didn't shake. Mom's fingers left my knee. Dad's jaw clicked like a lock. The cologne lawyer cleared his throat. The judge's eyes softened, then something jagged happened. Our neighbor, Mrs. Keene, the one who waved with 2 fingers and watered her garden in a big hat, took the stand. She had a stack of photos and a careful voice. She said she'd seen me left in the car more than once. She said she'd called last week when she noticed the sweat on my temples and the way I was fanning myself with a fast food receipt. She said she'd waited for my parents once to talk to them, but they'd driven off. She said she had thought about minding her own business. She looked at me when she said, "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner." Dad's face did something I'd never seen, cracked, just a little. He stared at the table like it might offer him a script. Mom's mouth was a thin white line. The lawyer objected and objected until objection sounded like a word that had lost its meaning. Before lunch, the judge asked a last question that sliced clean through our performance. "Why," she said to my parents, "did you leave him in the car at all?" Minutes held their breath. Dad said, "He's responsible." It was quick. Mom said, "We could see the car." The judge waited, and in that waiting, the room heard everything they didn't say. The judge recessed. We spilled into the hallway, where vending machines hummed and a poster about foster care curled at the corner. Dad rounded on me with eyes that were almost wet. "You didn't have to say yes," he hissed. "You didn't have to agree." Mom rubbed a spot on the wall as if she could erase the whole building. The guardian ad litem placed himself between us like a lighthouse. "He told the truth," he said. That's what the court asked. We sat on a bench, our family suddenly 3 strangers in a train station. Mom finally whispered, "I did it because he panics in crowds," nodding toward Dad like she was confessing and accusing at once. "He can't go in. He hates it. So I go fast." My head snapped to Dad. Crowd panic? The mall? Church? My stomach flipped, remembering all the Sundays Dad waited in the car while Mom and I went inside. Dad stared at the floor and said, barely audible, "It's not that." I leaned forward. "Then what?" He closed his eyes like the answer hurt his teeth. "Security cameras," he said. "I don't like being watched." The words landed like a handful of gravel. My brain scrambled. Cameras? Watched? Then, like a film splicing itself together, I remembered the half-finished electronics in our garage, the special wallets, the tags Dad clipped off clothes with. Neat pliers, the way he returned things for cash without receipts. I heard my own voice before I felt my lips move. "Were you shoplifting?" It cracked down the hallway, too loud, a dish shattering. Mom flinched. Dad pressed his thumb hard into his palm. Around us, the courthouse hummed, pretending not to overhear. The guardian ad litem's eyes closed for a blink. When he opened them, he was watching Dad with a stillness that made me feel both protected and exposed. Dad didn't answer. He didn't have to. The judge's assistant called us back in. We rose, 3 people carrying different versions of the same story. And as we re-entered the courtroom, the cologne around our lawyer thick as a fog, I knew that what the judge decided next would not just be about heat, or minutes, or windows. It would be about the kind of family we were when the doors were closed. The judge ordered parenting classes and unannounced home visits, and for a month our house felt like a stage set you couldn't exhale on. Mom labeled pantry jars. Dad practiced patience like a foreign language. I went to therapy with a woman who had sand in a tray and asked me to make scenes with small figurines. I made a car and a son and a boy with his palms upturned. "What's he asking for?" she asked. Permission, I said, and surprised myself. At night, the house performed quiet. In the garage, the smell of plastic and cardboard had a nervous edge. I watched Dad swear off certain stores and then drive to them anyway, watched him pull me along aisles like I was an excuse, watched his eyes track mirrors and domes and people in polo shirts wearing earpieces. Once, by the returns desk, he stood too long in that waiting space where impulse becomes plan. I felt the heat rise in my body the way it did in a sealed car. I touched his sleeve. "I'm thirsty," I said, and it was enough to move us. Mom's anger fermented. It turned into tidy resentments lined up like spice jars. She started sleeping on her side of the bed like it was a cliff edge. She started saying things like, "Since we're under a microscope and for show," and once, in the car, she said, "If the judge wants saints, she should go to church," and I laughed even though it wasn't funny. A surprise visit happened on a Saturday when the house smelled like pancakes and apology. The caseworker found nothing dramatic. She found a chore chart and a basket of sunscreen. She found me reading by a fan. She found Dad trying too hard to look relaxed. She found, tucked under a stack of grocery circulars, a folded receipt from a hardware store with 3 items circled and paid for in cash. She didn't comment. She wrote something instead. After she left, Dad's mouth made a thin line I now recognized as the border between shame and defensiveness. "We're doing everything they asked," he muttered. Mom snapped back, "Except stop doing the thing." That started it. He threw his hands up, then let them fall. "Do you want me to be a different person?" he asked, as if transformation were a hat you put on. Mom stared at him. "I want you not to use our son as a decoy," she said, and it was the first time anyone said the quiet part in the living room. The next week, something shifted. A letter arrived from the guardian ad litem, requesting a private meeting with me, no parents. It would be at school, in the counselor's room that smelled like dry erase markers. When I told Mom, her face went tight. "Of course," she said. "They get to keep building their case." Dad said nothing. He was looking at his hands. At school, the guardian ad litem asked if I felt safe. I thought about safe like a thermometer, numbers that meant something different to different people. I said, "Mostly," because mostly was the truest thing I had. He asked if I had ever been asked to lie. I stared at the carpet and watched the fibers blur. I said, "I've been asked to emphasize." He smiled, sad at the edges. "You're a precise kid," he said, and I liked that so much I almost cried, slid a small recorder onto the table and asked if I wanted to say anything to the court in my own words, in case I couldn't get them out next time. My mouth knew the shape of yes. I talked about heat and waiting and the way my stomach turned to stone when car doors locked. I talked about Dad's fear, which I could suddenly feel under his stubbornness like a heartbeat, and about Mom's insistence, which was survival worn thin. I said I didn't want to be a decoy anymore. Saying it out loud felt like putting a window where a wall had been. When I got home, the air in the house was wrong. The living room had been searched by ghosts, drawers open, couch cushions ajar. Mom was sitting very still at the table. Dad stood by the sink, gripping it so hard his knuckles looked like chalk. On the table lay the recorder, turned off. The letter that had requested privacy lay open beside it. "Did you tell them?" Dad asked, voice low. My mouth went dry. "Tell them what?" He swallowed. "About me." Mom's hand trembled as she touched the recorder with a fingertip. "They're going to take him," she whispered, not looking at me, as if saying it into the room could make it less likely. "They'll say we're unfit." Something rose up in me, an anger-eyed been stacking carefully like blocks. "I told them I was hot," I said, and my voice surprised us all. "I told them I was scared. I told them I don't want to be used." The blocks crashed. Silence. Then Dad, very quietly, "Used?" He sank into a chair like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I never meant, he stopped. In the quiet, the refrigerator hummed faithfully, unaware we were coming apart. That night, sleep was an empty room. At 2 a.m., whispered voices floated through the wall. Mom and Dad, low, frantic. We could leave, Dad said. Start over. With what money? Mom shot back. With what plan? He didn't answer. Then, softer, he said a sentence I would remember forever. I didn't think it was dangerous. I got up and stood in the hallway, my hand on their doorknob, ready to enter a life where we could fix it. Before I could turn it, headlights painted the ceiling. A car door slammed outside, then another. A firm knock at our front door cut the night in half. When Mom opened it, the caseworker stood there with an officer, not the tall one, a different one, and a folder I knew had my name in it. We need to talk, she said. There's been a development. In the living room's midnight light, the caseworker laid out papers like a slow-motion deal. The development was a neighbor's security footage, a compilation of small betrayals, me in the back seat with my head tilted back. The slow sag of a son, Mom hurrying, glancing over a shoulder, Dad lingering in the lot, his face a map of angles, then disappearing into a store he wasn't supposed to enter, exiting with a different gate and a bag that wasn't paid for. Mrs. Keene had shared the clips after our hearing, not to win or punish, she said, but because the truth helps. I didn't know if truth always helped, but it always arrived, the caseworker spoke gently. This changes our recommendation, she said. The officer shifted his weight, sympathetic and immovable. Mom's hand found my shoulder and rested there. Like a question. Dad looked like a balloon losing air. I expected the word removal. It hovered like a mosquito, inevitable, hungry. But the caseworker did not say it. Instead, she said safety plan. She said in-home supervision. She said no more unsupervised leaving. She said consequences if violated. She said classes, monitoring, therapy for me that wasn't optional this time. She looked at Dad and said, "Sir, there is a criminal matter to resolve separately." He closed his eyes. I could feel the apology he couldn't afford to offer. We slept a few hours. Morning came gray and ordinary, like no night had been split. We ate toast that tasted like cardboard. We sat around the table like people who had survived a storm and were counting new leaks, weeks blurred into a new normal that wasn't a performance. The car became a symbol we did not touch. Doors stayed open. Heat was monitored like an enemy. Dad stopped going to stores that unstitched him. He found a counselor whose office had a dog that lay on your feet while you talked, anchoring you to the floor. Mom kept her jaw soft on purpose. She practiced talking about fear without calling it weakness. I kept noticing where my body felt safe and where it didn't, and naming it, and believing myself. The second court date arrived. The judge read from papers and from faces. She commended compliance, acknowledged the video, noted progress. She asked me if I wanted to say anything. My heart pounded hard enough to count. I stood, palms damp, and chose words like stepping stones. I love my parents, I said. And I don't want to be in danger. I don't want to be a reason my dad does something he shouldn't. I don't want to be brave in the car anymore. I want to be a kid. The judge's eyes shone at the edges. She said a sentence I will hear in the quiet for years. It is not a child's job to manufacture their own safety. Then she used the word from the report again, the one that had once sounded like it could split us apart. She called what happened endangerment, and she said it plainly, like a diagnosis spoken in a room that also held a cure. She set more supervision. More classes, more check-ins. She warned Dad that any violation would change everything. She told Mom, who carried grit like armor, that strength also meant setting boundaries she kept. She looked at me last and said, "Tell the truth every time." We left quieter than we entered. In the parking lot, the summer air pressed soft as a hand. Dad squinted at the sun as if seeing it after a long time underground. You shouldn't have had to, he said, and I knew he meant all of it: heat, waiting, lying, covering, being brave. Mom nodded, tears carving honest roads down her cheeks. She said, we will do better. Not pretend. Do. There is no perfect ending for stories like this, only better rooms to stand in. Here's what I know: when I get in the car now, someone always gets in with me. If we forget something and need to run back inside, we all go, or we don't go at all. If the sun is high, we say so out loud, like an allergy, like a fact that matters. Dad carries a list in his wallet that doesn't include tools. It includes steps he takes when he feels the itch: call his sponsor, leave the store, tell the truth. Mom puts her keys down and breathes, and sometimes she takes off the armor and asks for help, and me? I learned a new word that rewrote me more than endangerment did: entitlement. Not the ugly kind you hear grown-ups complain about. The kind every kid should have and most don't know how to claim. The entitlement to safety. To not be brave in places that should be easy. To ask for water. To open the window all the way. To say I am hot and I am scared and that is enough. Thought the police report's word would brand me. Instead, it branded the truth. When people in the comments ask what they would have done, whether it was really that bad, I think about a car holding a small planet of heat and a boy counting breaths. I think about a judge who saw me as more than a plot point in my parents' lives. I think about the sound of a lock opening, the simple, miraculous click of a door that leads you into air you can breathe. And if you're wondering whether I ever forgave them, here's the twist: forgiveness wasn't a door I opened for them. It was a window I opened for me. Now, when I look in the rearview, I don't see a kid performing independence. I see a kid who learned to name danger so he could choose safety. And that, finally, is what the report called it: endangerment acknowledged, safety plan in place. The story doesn't end there, it ends with me, hand on a handle, ready to step out.